Fish sandwiches for everyone. You have heard this story before, I am quite sure. You cannot hardly miss it. A large crowd has gathered to be with Jesus, to hear him teach, to see him heal the sick. I don't know, 5,000 people there. And as it happens on a very daily basis, folks started to get hungry. And so Jesus fed them. He fed them all. 5,000 of them. He fed them all. You've heard it. Probably read it. You can't miss it. In fact, it's in the Bible 5 times. There's only 4 Gospels to contain it. And yet, it's in there 5 times. Matthew, it turns out, loved this story so much that he told it twice. I love it too. In one of Matthew's versions, he said that there were 5,000 men who were there. What does that mean? Because it sounds to me like he didn't even count all the women and children. Don't know why. But if that's the case, that sounds more like 20,000 people. Mark told this story. Luke, he told it. Even John told it. And you know, you don't always find things in John like you find in the other 3. But he told this story. I was reading through all these different versions this week, and it turns out that while I was thinking of using Matthew's version, the way John tells it is just so intriguing that I've decided to use that one instead. John's version includes this little boy with a little bit of bread and a couple of fish. And it goes like this. After this, Jesus went to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, also called the Sea of Tiberias. A large crowd kept following him because they saw the signs he was doing for the sick. Jesus went up the mountain and sat there with his disciples. Now the Passover, the festivals of the Jews, was near. When he looked up and saw a large crowd coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread for these people to eat?" Now he said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 6 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each of them to get even a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to Jesus, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they among so many people?" Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was a great deal of grass in the place, so they sat down, about 5,000 in all. Then Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. When they were satisfied, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up. And from the fragments of the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten, they filled 12 baskets. When the people saw the sign that he had done, they began to say, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." When Jesus realized that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain by himself. The Army Corps of Engineers had a motto in World War II. They said, "The difficult I'll do right now. The impossible will take a little time." The difficult I'll do right now. The impossible, that'll take a little while. Now, no one can say words like this without what I might call an obnoxious faith. Obnoxious. Faith and hope. Like everything is going to be okay. We will get through this. There's a fantastic magazine called Sojourners. And if you're ever interested in connecting the gospel to issues of social justice, I highly recommend Sojourners to you. It is edited by Jim Wallace, who you might find on CNN every now and then. He hosts these faith and values forums with candidates every time there's a presidential election. Now, this is a guy with one of those obnoxious kinds of faith. He says, hope is believing in spite of the evidence, and then watching the evidence change. Believing in spite of the evidence. The way John tells this story of Jesus feeding 5,000 people, what you'll find is there are a couple of different attitudes among his disciples. And really, I would say that there are two competing attitudes. So much so that I wonder which attitude it is that I usually have. Faith, kind of obnoxious faith and hope, or disbelief. Because a huge crowd has gathered to see and hear Jesus, to bring him the sick who can be healed. It's the stuff that Jesus lives for, right? And just so you know what's going on behind this story, it is the high holy days of Passover. No one in this crowd, 100 miles away in Galilee, has made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem this year to celebrate Passover. All of these folks had stayed home. Why? Maybe none of those folks there could afford it this year. I don't know. Things were tight. Maybe they just heard rumblings about this Jesus. You know, folks were talking by then. Maybe these people there weren't all that religious. It's hard to say. But the fact is, 5,000 of them were 100 miles away from Jerusalem while Passover was taking place. And Jesus determined that everyone there should share a meal together right there where they were. Because according to the calendar, no matter where they were, it was Passover. And that's what you did. You shared a meal. Now think about it. That could be any one of us, really. Couldn't it? Couldn't afford the big stuff this year? Well, I've heard about this Jesus, and I'm curious. I've come to see, get a better glimpse for myself. I'm not really all that religious. all these people around Jesus. It could be you and it could be me, for any number of reasons. And it turns out that Jesus is okay with that. In fact, he says, this right here among these people, this is the perfect place to celebrate the ancient meal of Passover and recall how God has delivered people from slavery. It's the perfect place as far as Jesus was concerned. Perfect place and the perfect people. That's what's going on behind this story, feeding the 5,000. And then Jesus says, now, how are we going to do it? And if you notice, that's when he ran into two competing attitudes among his disciples. How are we going to feed these folks? Where can we go and buy enough bread for everyone to eat? And it kind of suggests that Jesus himself believes that it can be done, doesn't it? Food for 5,000 people out here on a mountainside? Why, yes. Where can we go to get it? Philip. He did not catch the same vision, did he? He said, there's too many people. We cannot do that, Jesus. How are any of us going to come up with that kind of money? I mean, 12, 13 of us, we couldn't even scrape together enough to give out a crumb to each of them. I wonder if I might have looked at Jesus the same way. I mean, that's one attitude, and it could be mine. I'm not going to lie, I might be Philip. I'd still be a disciple, of course, but I might be Philip. But then there's that other one, Andrew. And he's got one of those obnoxious kind of face, doesn't he? He says, I've got a boy right here. And he's got 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Barley loaves, they're perfect for Passover. And 2 fish. What can this little bit of food do for so many people? Because it seems to me like Andrew actually believed that something was possible here. Like the difficult I'll do right now. The impossible, it'll take a little while. But I know a boy that's got a little bit of food already. What can we do with it? Competing attitudes. Because on one side, you got ain't no way. On the other side, let's get started. Can't be done. Can't hardly wait. And I wonder which one I am. Do you? Now, the way John tells it, Jesus has folks sit down and act just like they would, as if they had been able to celebrate Passover in the proper way. Sit down and relax, right there in the grass. And why not? You've got these folks who are there to witness Jesus for whatever reason. Maybe it was money or lack thereof, curiosity, desperation. I don't know. And Jesus says, we'll just all celebrate here together the way we are. with whatever we've got. We will make it work, and that will be good enough. It ought to say something to us. But the truth is that there are these doubts about it. How can you feed 5,000 people? I mean, between all of us, we just got a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. There are some serious doubts, and I get it. I get it. Because you ever stare at a church budget? It's coming in a few $1,000s short for the year, and you notice all of the things that haven't even been accomplished yet? I get it. Doubts. Church budget, maybe it's your budget. What with a parent in the hospital, job that might get downsized any time now, children who need so much just to make it to the first day of school this past week. How are you going to get from A to B, you wonder? How can you do so many things that need to be done when there just isn't all that available to go around? I was going to ask, have you ever asked that question? I know you have. Oh, and not to mention, think about retirement, college educations. Know what I mean? I very well might be Philip, I'll be honest. And yet Jesus says, just make those folks sit down. It's Passover, people. We are going to do this right. We've got some bread and we've got some fish. Fish sandwiches for everyone. I don't know what astounds me more, to be quite honest. That Jesus made all of that not only last for 5,000 people, but multiply so that there was so much left over. I don't know if it astounds me more that he did that or that there was a disciple who believed it. Because Andrew said, I'm with you. We've got a boy here with just a few loaves and a couple of fish. I don't know what astounds me more, the vision of Jesus or the faith of Andrew. Because he said, here's what we've got, Lord. What are you going to do with it? Jim Wallace said, hope is believing in spite of the evidence. Then watching the evidence change. Sounds like the Bible, doesn't it? Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Most of us long for the courage to have faith like this. And we're just so afraid. So afraid, so used to disappointment. Used to having our hearts broken. Used to making do instead of dreaming big. We long for the courage to have faith that says, here's what we've got. Show me, Lord, what you are going to do with it. I think most of us long for that. The difficult I'll do now. The impossible, it'll take a little while. I was out in Oklahoma City a few weeks ago with some teenagers. Mission trip, you know. And they sent me out with a group where between 10 of us, we really had no idea what we were doing. Building fences, greenhouses, doing this work for what they called an urban farm. Now, somehow the idea was that we were going to help build what would someday provide jobs and an alternative way of life for people in a neighborhood where amateur narcotics professionals, drug dealers, were often the ones who were seen as successful entrepreneurs. A neighborhood where you were as likely to end up dead by the age of 30 as you were likely to end up in prison. So an urban farm to address this. That is Jesus kind of dreaming, really. Gospel stuff. And I'm with these young men and women. You know all of them. And we're standing there in the hot sun with these power tools in our hands as if we know something about this kind of work. We did not. One of them walks over to me holding this battery-powered impact drill backwards in her hand. And she's just as excited to be out there building something important as you can imagine. And she says, "Where do we start? What do we do? How do I use this thing?" Now, we put in 4 solid days of work on that little patch of land. And by the time we left, these seasoned construction professionals had assembled an entire fence. 100 yards worth or so. Just one screw at a time, one board at a time, measuring, cutting, sweating, building. Someday, I don't know, maybe each of us will go back and we'll see what has become of that place that we helped build. And maybe we will see all kinds of people working there together on a whole new way of life. But what our teenagers said was more like Jesus' disciple Andrew than most of us can muster on many days. Because what they said is, "I'm here. I don't know a whole lot about this stuff. I may not have a lot to offer, but I believe. And I'm here. Show me what to do." I pray for that kind of faith. In fact, it is my prayer for all of us to have more of Andrew's faith, and less of Philip's. The kind that willingly takes on the difficult right now and has the courage to believe that the impossible is really just a matter of time.